Hello, and welcome back to Post Traumatic Revelations. I am your host, Afrah Caraballo. And in today's episode, we are looking at forgiveness. This topic makes me nervous because, what a complicated word. What a complicated and complex idea. What does it mean to forgive? Do we have to forgive? Do we want to forgive? It's such a loaded word, and there's just so many different levels of forgiveness and what it means and the angles. And so when this topic came to me, nervous. Yep, that's the word. Nervous and excited. And I love deep conversation, so I really look forward to your feedback on this one, but there's no way I'm gonna cover the entire concept, the entire range of all the elements of forgiveness, so here we go. Every religion, every spiritual teaching has some reference to the concept, to the act of forgiveness. It's it's as old as the human condition, really. If we look at Judaism, every year there's a day of atonement, Yom Kippur. Actually, it just passed a couple of weeks ago, um, but it happens around the Jewish New Year. And the Christians have Lent, which is about releasing and atoning and forgiveness. And Islam has something called Shab e Barat or Lailat ul Bara, and that is the night of forgiveness, and that happens around Ramadan. And while the Buddhists don't really have like a day of forgiveness or this concept of forgiveness per se, there is karma and dharma, and there is the intent to repair any damage that is done. And so it's not necessarily a forgiveness thing, but that personal responsibility of showing up and repairing any damage that is done to the relationship. So this this thing inside of us that we've chosen to name forgiveness. What is that? What is it really? And why do we do it? Why are we called to do it? And more interestingly is, why do we resist it? Why do we not forgive? So it's kind of easy to forgive little small mistakes. And as I say this, I think about the fact that mistake, accident, that's subjective too, right? I pause because, like so much about healing and recovery, is subjective. Trauma is subjective. Pain is subjective. Loss, healing are subjective. And so too is the idea of forgiveness. Who you are, where you are, again, your place and space in the world will determine your level of pain, your level of suffering, the level to which you're offended. For some people, a curse word, spilled milk, showing the bottom of your shoe, cutting someone off in traffic, flipping someone off, talking back to an adult or an elder, leaving the dinner table without permission, without being excused. These are seemingly small offenses if you're not taught what they mean and the importance of respecting these behaviors, these boundaries. So, forgiveness is connected to culture, place, and space in the world, to rules, laws, regulations. And then we have some bigger offenses, more universally agreed upon offenses like rape and robbery and murder that we might all agree deserve some kind of punishment. And then there are those who may consider these justifiable behaviors, and so not necessarily calling for punishment. And then somewhere in between these extremes of spilling milk and killing someone is the offense of a breakup or a divorce or a car crash or abuse, neglect. Really, the list of possible offenses that may call for some form of forgiveness can be endless. And what they all have in common, though, is someone's feelings were hurt, someone's sense of safety and wholeness was damaged. And when we feel hurt, something of value was damaged. And there's a call for some kind of attention and repair. What's damaged by an offensive or hurtful behavior is subjective. And because it matters to the person that's hurt or offended, repair is necessary. I say it all the time, and I'll say it again. Accidental punches still hurt. And so attention is still needed to repair the damage. So back to forgiveness. We're taught to do it. We feel a certain call to do it. Sometimes we want to, and sometimes we don't. When it's a small offense, forgiveness takes less time, less effort. Sometimes simply hearing, "Oh, I'm so sorry," can move the process along. Knowing that the mistake was indeed a mistake can help to ease the pain and pave the way to forgiveness. So often, remorse is like the salve or the healing balm, the healing ointment needed to repair the damage. When your friend or your partner learns that they've hurt you in some way, learns that they've done some kind of damage to the relationship, and they actually take the time to say, "Oh my God, babe, I'm so sorry. What can I do to fix this?" Your body literally softens. You become receptive and you allow the healing and the forgiveness to happen. And then a relationship is restored, or at the very least, it's on the mend, it's being repaired. Some damage obviously takes more than words to repair. Sometimes there's no remorse. Sometimes the extent of the damage is so deep that it's beyond words, that we haven't even figured out what happened, what needs to happen, but we know that sense of safety has been broken. And sometimes Not only is there no remorse, but the extent of the damage is unknown. Hurt people hurt people. I remember hearing this on an Oprah Winfrey show in the 90s, and I've heard it a few times since, and I've witnessed it in my life and in my work. It's true. People who have been hurt, damaged, traumatized, beaten, offended, and have not been healed, have not been repaired, can and often do hurt or damage or abuse or traumatize or neglect other people. But forgiveness for me is about healing the damage. To me, forgiveness is about slowing and eventually stopping the bleeding so that healing can happen, so that I'm not bleeding onto other people, that I'm showing up in relationship whole and receptive, responsible for how I show up. So, forgiveness, it softens the body, it softens the cells, it softens the organs, the mind. And in this softness, there's more oxygen flow, there's more blood flow, there's more healing. The immune system works better, right? So, forgiveness is not just an act. The physiological consequences of forgiveness are pretty powerful. Forgiveness releases the prisoner, it opens the gates to the post traumatic prison. Forgiveness releases judgment, guilt, and shame, those barriers to lasting healing. Now, when you have a history of trauma, grief, loss, when you have a history of abuse, neglect, abandonment, war, and you think about forgiveness, forgiveness can sound like a sick joke. Why the hell would I forgive her? Why the hell would I forgive him? Why in the world would I forgive them? They did this to me. They were wrong. They violated me. That judgment feels justified. It feels right. And the anger can make you feel strong and defended and protected. The anger that often comes with righteous judgment makes you feel protected and defended. It makes you feel less vulnerable. It makes you feel less weak. Judgment and anger can make for some pretty effective armor against a possible of future pain, against future betrayal. That if you keep your guards up, they can't surprise you, they can't hurt you. Right? It also serves to isolate you. If no one gets in, you don't get out. Thing about isolation is wherever you go, there you are. And what I know about trauma victims is that we can get lost in our post traumatic prisons of judgment, guilt, and shame. And as trauma survivors, we can become very creative with our relationships. We start to play around with halfway engaging, right? That we try to manipulate our environments and our relationships, that we have a plan B. I'll show up this way or show up that way. And we say things like, I'll forgive, but I won't forget, right? Well, first of all, but is a negation, right? Dr. Phil says, but really means forget what I just said. Here's what I really mean. So when you say, I'll forgive, but that's an indication that you're not ready to forgive yet. And that's okay. Forgiveness involves giving something up, right? It's in the name, forgive. So forgiveness involves giving something up, letting something go. And that can make us feel empty inside, vulnerable. If I let this go, am I saying it never happened? If I let this go, am I approving of what was done? Am I okay with what was done? Forgiveness isn't about agreeing with the offender. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. And no, I don't ever suggest you just let it go. Some traumas are so deep that it's really about laying it down, right? Honoring what was lost and putting it to rest. Not a whimsical, just let it go, just get over it. No. To me, forgiveness is a process. And part of that process is a laying down, an honorable laying it down, right? And in that new space, adding something more intentional, maybe a self defense class, maybe meditation, maybe a self care class. But in that place that was once pain and trauma, when we lay down that pain and trauma, we actually fill that space with something more intentional, something more nurturing. So often, trauma survivors turn their pain into purpose by helping people who are also victims of that same situation. That empowerment and education become part of the forgiveness process, right? But you don't have to forgive. And I pause because I want you to hear that. You don't have to forgive. It's helpful. It definitely improves your quality of life, but you don't have to do it. Just like you don't have to go to the doctor if you have a broken leg. That bone will grow back. So what? You're walking around with a limp. So what? You can't run as well or run at all. So what? Unhealed broken hearts, unhealed broken minds are similar to that broken leg. If you don't heal the trauma, and part of that is the forgiveness process, you do love with a broken heart. And what that means is you have a plan B, that there's always one foot out of the door. You're always calculating. You're never feeling safe or at peace with relationship, right? That there's this constant fear that someone's plotting against you, that someone's out to get you, that there's never this peace that happens, that we're loving with a plan B and plotting our escapes. So, what does this have to do with forgiveness? Well, forgiveness is not really about anyone else. The dirty secret about forgiveness is it's the most selfish thing that you can do. You don't even have to tell the person that you're forgiving that you have forgiven them. because it's about you. I heard somewhere, probably on another Oprah Winfrey show, I love her, but I heard somewhere that holding a grudge is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. So here's the deep, dark secret that you'll find in the deepest parts of your post traumatic prison. The person who really, really needs the forgiveness is you. The person that waits to be freed from the post traumatic prison is you. The part of you that was too young, too weak, too distracted, too afraid, too poor, too old, too slow, too whatever it was to stop the traumatic event. That part of you that never saw it coming, that part of you that was confused and didn't know what's happening. Remember, trauma is a disgusting surprise, right? If you could plan for it, then you're not traumatized. And often I hear survivors say, "Why didn't I just do this? Why didn't I just do that? If I could have done this, I should have done this, I should have done that." And looking back on it, and all of these post-traumatic judgments lead to post-traumatic guilt and shame. And how mean, how rude, how ruthless to judge from your post-traumatic point of view the pre-traumatized versions of yourselves. Like, how mean is that to be on this side of the situation and point the finger of what could have been done and what should have been done and what you should have known and should have. No one wants to be traumatized. No one wants to be violated. No one wants to feel terrified and horrified and helpless and hopeless. And so, post traumatically, how is it helpful to judge, except that it offers walls and walls of defense, walls and walls of isolation? But how mean, how rude. If you knew then what you knew now, you wouldn't have been traumatized. If you could prevent it, you would not have been traumatized. So, back to forgiveness. There's usually some form of giving up or letting go, right? It's even in the word, it's in the name, forgiving. But when you're in pain, when all you can feel is pain and hopelessness, when you're in grief, in the middle of the loss, you're not feeling very giving, you're not feeling very generous. When we're grieving a loss, no matter how big or how small, whether you just stubbed your toe or lost a loved one, in that moment of acute pain, you're very self centered. I hurting. I am losing. I, me. So giving is not something we're readily embracing when we're feeling that place of loss. So What do we need to be able or willing to allow that healing? What do we need to give ourselves permission to heal? What does it take to have permission to forgive? In a word, validation. First, we must validate, we must acknowledge that damage has been done, that damage has been caused. Validate what has been lost, saying things like, "You hurt my feelings," or "My feelings were hurt," meaning my sense of safety has been damaged, my sense of trust has been damaged. My hand was cut, my leg was broken, my car was hit, I was robbed, I was raped, I was shot, my spouse or my friend was killed. You must first validate your loss. If the other party accepts responsibility and actually do the work to repair and restore what was lost, forgiveness starts to happen pretty easily. But if the other party denies responsibility, ignores your loss, ignores your cause for justice, or fights you in your attempts to right a wrong, forgiveness is a much harder process. I say process because it is. You don't simply say, "Okay, I forgive you," and it's done. Even when you love the person, there's this on a cellular level, there's this pain. And on a cellular level, there needs to be the restoration of safety, right? So, depending on the extent of the pain, the hurt, the violation, the mistake, the loss, it will take time. And so, giving yourself permission to forgive, giving yourself permission to soften around an offense starts the process. But then there are choices along the way to continue in that process of forgiveness, right? This reminds me of my daughter. Oh my goodness. This is over 20 years ago, but this reminds me of my daughter. She's about a year and a half, maybe 2 at the most, but she's at daycare and some kid bites her cheek. Oh, my gorgeous little baby comes home with these teeth marks in her cheek, and it's red and it's ugly, and I am livid. Can't even, yeah, can't even. And I'm sharing this with you because it's still a lesson to me today. But so I want to know who did this? What's being done to this kid, right? I want this little kid's head on a platter. What happened? And they just send my kid home with an ice pack and a little note saying she was bitten by a classmate. No, not enough. I want blood, right? So over the next 3, maybe 2, 3 days, maybe 4, I don't know, but I'm fiercely and gently determined, right? I'm questioning my little kid. I'm grilling her. So, who bit you? When did it happen? Do you remember his name? Mind you, she's like 1.5, 2 years old. So, I'm trying to get the information I need to satisfy my hunger for vengeance. But all I get is a name, right? So, finally, after the first day, I get a name. And I want to know what this daycare is gonna do about this little biter, right? What's the punishment? What's the protocol? What's going on? And the staff at the daycare are like, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, we do not release the name of the child, for the protection of the child," and on and on and on, and I don't care. I find out from my daughter who this kid is, and I want little Connor's head on a platter, but that's not how it works. So, day 3, and my perfect little angel has this bruise on her face. And now it's that nasty green, purple, black bruising that happens on her cheek. And I'm like, oh my God, my perfect child has been defaced. And I'm still mad. I understand the protocol at the daycare, but I am mad. And I come to pick her up, and she's playing with the biter. She's playing with little Connor, and I rush over there, and I grab her, and I say to her, "We don't play with biters." And she looks at me, and she's like, "Mommy, me and Connor are friends now." "Excuse me? Friends now?" Like, what do you do with that? I am set on vengeance and isolation and guarding and staying away, and she's like, "No, mommy, we're friends now." She still has the bruise on her face, black and blue, and she's friends now. So, I'm sharing this with you because it reminds me she hasn't learned yet. At 2, 1.5, 2, she hasn't learned to hold grudges yet. Forgiveness just pours out of her. It's not it's not something we need to learn. We're all born this way, trusting, loving, forgiving. Like these are ways of being that we later give words to, that we later give judgment to, but we're born forgiving. It's not something we need to learn. It's something we are. Forgiveness is like swimming. Every child is born knowing how to swim, but then we're taught to fear the water. We're taught to fear betrayal. We're taught to fear abuse, right? We learn things like stranger danger, and there's something to be said for being cautious, but we're taught to hold grudges out of fear of being hurt. So it's really about remembering who we really are and what we're made of. We're not born holding grudges. Children are some of the most forgiving people, no matter what happens to them. If you say, "I'm sorry," they're like, "Okay." Even if you don't say, "I'm sorry." Ugh, as I say this to you now, I'm reminded of my son who tells me sometime I think he was like 6, 5 or 6 years old, but he says, "Mommy, I love you even when you're mean to me." And I said, "Kanan, I love you too, even when you don't do what I tell you to do." Instead of just receiving his non-judgmental gift, right, I had to put my little jab in there because I'm a mom and I'm still learning or trying to remember this space of just forgiveness, right? So again, we're born forgiving. It's just our way of being. We learn later to judge and defend and protect and hold grudges and be safe, safe, safe. We learn to fear the water, and then these are things we have to learn, like unlearn, right? And so it's about remembering who we really are, our natural state. Remember that we are made of love, of hope, of healing, of forgiveness. We're made of trust and safety. We are made to float, and we are made to forgive. All we need is to remember and give ourselves to permission to heal. And so I invite you and remind myself to be changed and not diminished by our traumas. And thank you again for your time, attention, and permission. I wish you love, hope, and healing. And until next time, be well.